Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you as always. Some pretty important news out of the court system today, where the federal court has moved drastically to weaken the Voting Rights Act, barring private citizens and civil rights groups from suing under a key provision of the landmark law. And those suits have been some of the biggest improvements of the Civil Rights Act over the years. So I'm going to break that all down for you. Also today, we look into the Israel-Hamas war, continuing to give you the latest updates, including negotiations continuing on a possible hostage release, according to the White House, although nothing is yet finalized. Strong words from the chief of the UN, Antonio Guterres, saying the number of civilians killed in Israel's war has been unparalleled and unprecedented since he took office. Also, we're taking a look at the continued attacks on the Gaza and Indonesian hospital. Also, we have some landmark election results coming out of Argentina at the moment. Javier Milei, a psycho anarcho-capitalist supreme libertarian, has just won the election in Argentina. It's good. Obviously, it is good when, what seems to be a fair democratic process is played out in anywhere in Latin America. It's always a tough time for some of that stuff. But it does seem like they're in for a world of economic hurt. We'll break that down for you as well. All right, so we start off today with some big news coming out of the court system, where a federal appeals court has moved on Monday to drastically weaken the Voting Rights Act, issuing a ruling that would effectively bar private citizens and civil rights groups from filing lawsuits under a central vision of the landmark civil rights law. It was made by the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, found that only the federal government could bring a legal challenge under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, a crucial part of the law that prohibits election or voting practices that discriminate against Americans based on race. So that's a pretty, one of the biggest parts of that law. And the only way, it has to be someone in the Department of Justice, presumably, that would be able to come in and challenge that. That's the only person that would be able to do that. And there really is a kind of disturbing situation, to say the least, because, who's going to be, Merrick Garland, even in the best of times for, liberals, ostensibly, Merrick Garland has been far from perfect in the Justice Department. To put it all to someone like that is a really, really horrifying situation, to say the least. So let's get further here into the details. The opinion's almost certain to be appealed to the Supreme Court, where the court's current conservative majority have issued several decisions in recent years that have weakened the Voting Rights Act, but the justices have upheld the law in other instances, including a June ruling that was actually quite surprising. A lot of people were talking about in the electoral circles to find that Alabama had drawn a racially discriminatory congressional map. And I think that, the question with that one would be, who are the people that were bringing the suit, which in this case, it really did stun a lot of election law experts at the time. So this was a state governmental case against Milligan, which I don't really know what this was back. It was Allen versus Milligan, so it was Secretary of State Allen versus Milligan, who I presume is a private citizen. So again, that even would be this key decision they made that would not hold up under their the new standards under this decision. And again, this is obviously a consequence of just Trump having his free reign with judges and appointments and stuff like that throughout his 4 years. Biden has done a pretty good job. He, I believe, is continuing to be above Donald Trump's pace for appointing judges, but I do think, there has been some delays, obviously, with the Dianne Feinstein tomfoolery of her having shingles for like forever and not being able to pass any judges. That probably has put a dent in things, but this is probably going to be one of the most important projects just to stop, when the Democrats inevitably screw things up and lose the White House, to stop just have some sort of institutional bulwark to stop against a big right-wing tide. So passed in 1965, the Voting Rights Act, probably one of the most significant achievements of the civil rights movement, undoing decades of discriminatory Jim Crow laws and protecting against egregious racial gerrymanders. But the law has been under legal assault since its inception, and court decisions through the years have hollowed out key provisions, including a requirement that states with a history of discrimination in voting obtain approval from the federal government before changing their voting laws. That was something that John Roberts played a big role in. Something so liberals like to say, oh, John Roberts is so moderate. That was one of the key provisions that, I believe it was like 2012, 2013 that Roberts got rid of, giving states with this history, mainly in the South and Deep South area, those are the ones that have, through years and years, ever since the slave era, prevented any type of disenfranchisement for enfranchisement for African Americans in our political system. So the Monday decision by the Court of Appeals, which centered on a case in Arkansas, found that the text of the Voting Rights Act did not explicitly contain language for a private right of action. So essentially just saying the private right, there is no right among the private citizens to take action on this explicitly, or the right of private citizens to file lawsuits under the law. Therefore, the court found the right to sue would effectively lie with the government alone. And it seems like only the federal government in this case, which is really quite crazy. Should the ruling stand, it would remove perhaps the most important facet of the Voting Rights Act. A majority of challenges to discriminatory laws and racial gerrymanders, and some of the most perhaps impactful ones have come from private citizens and civil rights groups. So a really, really big deal if now, the NAACP can't come in and say, this map, or the ACLU can't come in and say this, this charge is some way, discriminatory and disenfranchises people on the basis of race. If they can't come in and say it, and so, down to the Justice Department or a state to come in and do this, it would be a devastating near death blow to the Voting Rights Act if it remains the law, said Wendy Weiser, the director of the democracy program at the Brennan Center of Justice. Radical theories that would have previously been laughed out of court have been taken increasingly seriously by an increasingly radical judiciary. But Ms. Weiser said she would be surprised if the decision stand based on decades of legal precedent and recent rulings by the Supreme Court. But the fact that it could get to the Supreme Court, and especially a court with this majority, should not make anybody feel comfortable, because this is really kind of the worst case scenario, and would put us would be another example of a judicial majority just completely unrepresentative, a popular majority taking away Americans' rights at a breakneck clip, something that would really freak a lot of people out, even people who you wouldn't think would be freaked out, in the way that we saw with abortion, where many, many people, women, men, just people moderates were like, hey, this is too far. Enough is enough. We need to roll back on this. We can't be losing rights in the 21st century. We should be, maybe moderating them, I guess, if you're conservative, but, turning back the pages of time to such a degree, I think is a thing that, a lot less people than you would think really, really want to do when push comes to shove. Yeah, which has certainly made things surprisingly tough for, at least with the Dobbs effect, for the Republicans. Some conservative legal scholars heralded Monday's decision, saying it would prevent the Voting Rights Act from being used for political ends. Jason Sneed, executive director of Honest Elections Project, a conservative group, said today's decision is a win for Arkansas and for the rule of law. The Voting Rights Act remains intact as a tool to prevent actual discrimination and disenfranchisement, but the VRA is not and never was intended to be a partisan weapon against democratically enacted election integrity laws and redistricting practices. So, don't let this Voting Rights Act, you have to literally, for them to consider it actual discrimination, you have to be, yelling the N-word at black people trying to go to the polls or something. Like that's how explicit, that's how blatant, that's how, just completely in your face, unsubtle it would have to be for them to raise it to the standard of actual discrimination. No, not just, using every single possible legal method to make it harder for black people to get to the polls. It has to be, you literally have to be out and out saying it, or admit, that's the ridiculously high and just unrealistic standard that a lot of these people have when you really kind of push them about it, which is quite disturbing. We will definitely be keeping a very close eye on this story to see what happens to it when it gets to the Supreme Court. So it's something you are going to want to stay tuned to Newsflash for. All right, so we move on to our next story, and it is, of course, the story we've been following pretty much nonstop since its inception on October 7th, or not since inception on October 7th, since it reflared on October 7th, the Israel-Palestine conflict, where we are going to go through some of the latest in terms of updates. And Okay, so we're looking through some of the key stories of the week, but first, or of the day, excuse me. But first, we go to some just general news. Negotiations to secure releases of captives held in Gaza have been advancing, according to the White House, but nothing has yet been finalized. Mediations seemingly between Israel, Qatar, and America. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says the number of civilians killed in Israel's war on Gaza has been unparalleled and unprecedented since he took office in 2017. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks had surrounded the Indonesian hospital in Gaza, where at least 12 people were killed following direct Israeli strikes in the morning. Gaza's health ministry director dismissed Israel's claim that it had found Hamas tunnel under the Al-Shifa hospital, describing it as a pure lie. We'll get into that, that kind of multi-part video, shall we say, in a little bit. More than 13,300 people have been killed since Gaza's Israeli bombardment began on October 7th, government media said. In Israel, the death toll in Hamas's attacks stands at 1,200. Again, important to say, half of those were soldiers. So, a lot of interesting stuff going on. Also, hopefully we'll be able to get to just the general kind of Israel, or just the opposing threats that Israel faces from around the region, both the Houthis and the Hezbollah, the world of Hezbollah, or not the world of Hezbollah, but just the force of Hezbollah up in the north. They apparently had one of their biggest strikes yet today, so we can get through all of that. But meanwhile, we start in Khan Yunis, Hani Mahmoud for Al Jazeera. There are more airstrikes taking place right now at different locations in the Gaza Strip from the north to the south. Literally the entire northern part of Gaza right now is under heavy bombardment and airstrikes. Again, this is for people who are kind of paying attention here. There has been no clear confirmed military control or well-established military control even around the far edges of the northern Gaza Strip, because we see Beit Hanun, Beit Lahaya, all the places. If you pull up a map of Gaza that are kind of on the northern and kind of northeastern edges of Gaza, are at some of the most kind of under the heaviest attack in terms of the Hamas resistance, in terms of these people popping up out of holes in the ground with rocket propelled grenades and blowing up their tanks. And that has obviously necessitated the need for increased bombing. Confrontations with the Israeli military are also taking place right at the center of Gaza, at the axis where Israeli military pushed their armored vehicles. Where we are reporting from in Khan Yunis has also been a major target of Israeli airstrikes. We are talking about both sides, the eastern side of Khan Yunis and the western side of the city. Again, this is where we heard, at a time, it was appropriate and it was recommended by Israeli forces to flee from the eastern parts to the central and western part of Khan Yunis. But now, of course, they're targeting both. It is a continued theme that even some of the most pro-Palestinian, mainstream news sources, I have yet to see anyone really get a lot of flack for and get a lot of pushback for, which is, how in the world are you in any way justifying the fact that you're telling people to flee to a certain place and bombing them? Like, that is unbelievable right there. Khan Yunis, Gaza City, up and down, just continued bombing here in a really, really awful situation. Palestinians living in tents and other makeshift shelters are bracing for a cold and wet winter, with the WHO warning rain could further spread disease. More than 1.7 million people, more than 70% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million, are estimated to have now been forced to leave their homes, according to the UN's latest flash update, and more than 1 million children are going to bed hungry. Ghassan Abu Sita, a doctor who works at Gaza's Al-Shifa and Al-Ahli Arab hospitals, said Israel's destruction of Gaza's health sector is part of a military strategy that aims to wipe out the Palestinians. What has been different in this war than all the other wars I have been at, not just in Gaza, but all around the region, in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, is that the destruction of the healthcare system has been the main thrust of the Israeli military strategy. And if you look at what they did to the Al-Rantisi Children's Hospital, then, of course, in Al-Shifa, and then you now have the people continuing to surround the Indonesian hospital, the Israelis, it certainly seems to be that there is some major focus around how, maybe I'm sure they probably will say that, oh yeah, all the Hamas bases are in the hospitals, and we've seen how thoroughly that has flopped with the best they could do is, they took a hostage there on October the 7th, I don't know, to get treated. Again, it's like, why would you want to put the hostages in, and again, if they were putting them in the secret lair, why can't you show them taking the hostages into the secret lair? It's most likely, Again, because there is no secret layer, and that they were taken there for some other, treatment / interrogation purpose. Because I don't know, if I were you, if I were, an evil terrorist group like Hamas, I would not want to kill off my hostages that I just got. I don't know if you saw the video, but they seem pretty happy to get those guys. I don't think they would want to kill them right off the bat. He said that 800,000 people who do not have access now to healthcare, including wounded Palestinians who are being bandaged up the best that they could be due to a lack of supplies, people who would need dire surgeries, just, given a bandage, say, sorry, we'll try and get to you soon. And this is when they have the ability to do surgery, which is getting less and less as fuel and electricity gets scarcer and scarcer. We had over 500 wounded in the grounds of Al-Aqli Arab when we ran out of medication. I honestly and truly believe that this is part of the military strategy. Those patients are going to die. Anybody who's lucky enough to survive the initial assault in the Israeli strategy was to destroy the healthcare system so they do not survive their wounds. It is obvious this is a genocidal war, she said there. In an open letter published in the New York Review of Books, the scholars there expressed their dismay and disappointment at political leaders and notable public figures invoking the Holocaust memory to explain the current crisis in Gaza and Israel. They pointed to recent comments from Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who compared Hamas to the Nazis, as well as U.S. President Biden, who said the Palestinian group had engaged in barbarism that is as consequential as the Holocaust. It is understandable why many in the Jewish community recall the Holocaust and earlier pogroms when trying to comprehend what happened on October 7th, said the letter's open letter signatories, which included professors in Canada, Germany, Israel, the U.S., and the U.K. However, appealing to the memory of the Holocaust obscures our understanding of the anti-Semitism Jews face today and dangerously misrepresents the causes of violence in Israel and Palestine, which is a very welcome intervention from scholars that, of course, will not be listened to because it just does not fit the narrative. Anyway, it really is kind of a remarkable situation here. We have also continuing fears as we look at the health system as patients are being transferred from the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza to healthcare facilities in the south of the enclave. Fears are growing that the already strained southern hospitals could soon collapse. Nasser Hospital for the past few weeks has been overwhelming. Again, now they have to serve 2 million people getting pushed into an area that was previously incredibly dense for 1 million people. The population is now going to, the area is going to be cut in half and the population in that area is going to be doubled. So Nasser Hospital, again, for the past few weeks has been very overwhelming with the number of injured people coming from the city of Khan Yunis. Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud reported from the city in southern Gaza, which remains under heavy Israeli bombardment. Apparently now Israel's also trapping Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, staff members, according to the director of the Palestinian program, Deputy Director Amber Alayan. She's told Al Jazeera that a number of its staff remain in the Al-Shifa hospital area unable to evacuate. It's going to be very interesting to see what they, how that is responded to in the international community, and if there's actually any real effort by the Israelis to say, hey, these aren't Hamas terrorists, these are actually Médecins Sans Frontières people. So apparently at this point, with the Doctors Without Borders situation in the Al-Shifa hospital, so there's about 70 people there at the moment, including staff and family members, sheltering in the organization's compound, in the surrounding buildings, she said. Apparently people did attempt to evacuate, but that led to the death of one person. Her colleagues are still trapped in the compound and are running out of food and water, in what is really a horrific, just kind of unimaginable situation. And in a time where previously, in pretty much all other conflicts, MSF, kind of the three magic letters to be like, you are in good standing no matter who you, who's ruling, no matter who's in charge of the situation, and no matter how, violent of history they may be, but not in this situation where we've seen just even the most, traditionally independent actors be labeled as Hamas supporters or, terrorists or whatever. The clinic compound, she said, is a clearly marked and known as an MSF clinic. The Israeli attack on the Indonesian hospital was the same as Al-Shifa, according to the Gazan Health Ministry. Ashraf Al-Qudra, who spoke with Al Jazeera Arabic, he said that the Israeli military was firing nonstop at the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza and said that drones were shooting at anyone who moved in the hospital courtyard. He said that since Monday morning, no one had been allowed to enter or leave the hospital, which is really kind of a shocking situation. They're just having this on lockdown, this situation. And we've heard no, major buildup. Like, this kind of reflects what is a really kind of shifting of the goalposts to, just slowly allow us to accept more and more evil and more barbarity and just have it fly under the radar. Because if you remember, a few weeks ago, there was a big debate about, Al-Ahli Hospital, was that being bombed by a misfired Palestinian rocket? Because, Israel would never bomb a hospital. And now we see with the Al-Shifa Hospital, there was this whole debate, this whole, rigmarole put up by Israel to say this is a Hamas training center. And then we see just a few guns and nothing special, like this clearly fake video of, one frame or one scene is this drone going down what looks to be some sort of, elevator or ventilation shaft. And then it cuts to a clearly handheld camera inside of a Hamas tunnel to be like, look, this leads to this, when it clearly doesn't. But then, that was all the whole justification for the just straight up raiding of a major hospital and major refugee center in a war of Israel's creation. Now, they're saying, screw it. We're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to have drones circling over a Indonesian hospital, menacingly just vultures, just shooting at anyone who moves. And, if there's one thing they can do is just, make weapons that are all too efficient at killing civilians. That is the, pretty much the MO of the, proud military security tech sector that Israel likes to brag so much about. The Israeli military are ending the last hope that anyone in northern Gaza has for treatment. That means about 800,000 and 900,000 people will end up without any hospital. This will lead to the death of many people who are suffering from long-term diseases or are injured, and gives you a pretty good estimate there of how much there has been a major movement or really lack thereof, when it comes to going from the north and south. There still is a lot of people up there who have heard from their relatives it's incredibly unsafe to go to the south, or for whatever reason just, say, I'm staying in my damn home, I'd rather, die here than just flee in the south and, just be, eventually pushed into Egypt. This kind of consistent, really horrific, just tragic mindset that we've seen from a lot of people in Gaza, that it's almost better to, you're unlucky if you survive the constant airstrikes, because it's just a hell on earth that they're living in. And I think it goes to the fact that there's, a lot of people still there, and Israel is not only bombing the place that they're telling them to flee to, but is taking away any sort of access to hospitals in any major way. So Al-Qudra added there are about 700 people still at Al-Shifa, including 259 patients. Presumably the rest are going to be staff. And again, so many preventable injuries coming out of the situation. It is just absolutely horrific. Gaza resident, this is according to a producer of Al Jazeera, a Gaza resident by the name of Omar said the besieged enclave is becoming a real-life version of Hollywood's Hunger Games. He chose not to list his last name, and he says the 45-day war has made basic humanitarian necessities very scarce, and when available, extremely expensive. We will walk miles to get water and buy it for triple the regular price, Omar, who is currently residing in southern Gaza, told Al Jazeera. We are lucky to be getting half a liter, or 0.13 gallons, per day per person. On the most amazing days, it's up to 0.75 liters or 0.2 gallons. With many bakeries either being bombed or overcapacity. Again, bombing multiple bakeries all across the, this is a complete attack, not just on the Hamas terrorists, but on the people, on the very just civilian population of Gaza. And, it's just basically willful ignorance. When you look at all the statements coming out of Israel, you look at their actions and you still say, oh, this is just, a targeted, precise attack against the Hamas terrorists. Like, that is a perfect way, if you hear someone say that, to just take them off your list of credible people forever. Like, Jesus Christ. Anyway, further exacerbating the situation, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the besieged territory have been forced to move south amid Israel's ground invasion in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, some good news, the second U.S. senator has called for a ceasefire. He is on the left of the party. He is an elderly man, but he is not Bernie Sanders. He is Jeff Merkley of Oregon. He said, I am calling for a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities by both sides. To endure the ceasefire and the following negotiations must accomplish other essential objectives, including the release of all hostages and a massive influx of humanitarian aid, as we look to see a possible entrance of some kind of humanitarian aid in exchange for hopefully some sort of release of the hostages in Israeli prisons as well, but that's looking increasingly unlikely. Meanwhile, though, do want to give a quick update on what has been going on outside of Israel beyond their national borders, and that goes with Hezbollah, and that also goes really as well with the Yemeni Houthis, which both did some pretty major activities, which we'll get into. So the Houthi rebels, which is, kind of a misleading term because they kind of overthrew the government, which was backed by the United, and they're, of course, an Iranian-backed militant group. They overthrew the government in Yemen, and they were supported, that government was, in a really intensely devastating campaign, especially for civilians. Some of the worst attacks that Obama got absolutely hammered for, when weddings were struck, school buses were struck in Yemen. That was backed by Obama and backed by Saudi Arabia and backed throughout the Trump administration as well. Then China comes in, makes a peace deal, forces some concessions out of the Houthis, forces some concessions out of the Yemeni government, and the U.S. there loses a lot of credibility. We covered that when it happened on the show earlier this year. So now Yemen's Houthis are like, hey, we just fought off the Saudis backed by the United States. That's a huge deal. I mean, that's a pretty much one of the best military accomplishments that, in the region that you could want to have, fighting off a U.S.-backed force at an intensely heavy cost, by the way. It should be made perfectly clear. But when it comes to guerrilla warfare, they definitely know what they're doing. So it's important to say that this threat is actually quite, I wouldn't say, super serious, but definitely something to keep a pretty close eye on, because they have now taken control of a cargo ship in the southern Red Sea as the war in Gaza sends soaring tensions in the region. Just to give you a little bit of a mental map here, if you picture, that part of the region, you have kind of Israel up top, Israel, Jerusalem, and then, of course, down into the Gaza Strip. You've probably seen that map a billion times. And then, of course, you have the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt at the top of the Red Sea. And then all the way on the bottom, under a pretty big country called Saudi Arabia, you have Yemen. And that is where they have been, that is, of course, connected by the Red Sea, on which the Israeli ship, which was hijacked by the Houthis, was sitting. The Houthis controlled northern Yemen and its Red Sea coast, which is important there. Said the ship was Israeli, but Israel described it as a British-owned and Japanese-operated cargo vessel with no Israeli nationals on board. Some 25 people have been believed to been on board the Galaxy Leader, reported to be partly owned by an Israeli businessman and sailing under the flag of the Bahamas when it was seized en route from Turkey to India. Ownership details in the public shipping databases associated with ships' owners are Ray Car carriers founded by Abraham Rami Ungar, who is known as one of the richest men in Israel. So maybe there was some Israeli connection there, at least on board. Ungar told the AP that he was aware of the incident, but could not comment further as he awaited details. A ship linked to him experienced an explosion in 2021 in the Gulf of Oman. Israeli media blamed it on Iran at the time. So I think it's interesting that why, Iran, through the Houthis or through themselves, they characterize this Netanyahu did as an Iranian-backed attack. It's very interesting to see why, them reacting to this and how they're characterizing it and why this ship was so, important to them. But either way, it's going to be very important to keep a close eye on what the Houthis do in the future, because they do know something about fighting off foreign or even, local, regional military forces. Okay. Also important to look at what Hezbollah has been up to, where an IDF base in the north has been damaged by rocket fire, military hits in Hezbollah targets. So skirmishes between the IDF and Hezbollah continued Monday amid Israel's war against Hamas on the Gaza Strip, with the Iranian-backed terror group here, this is in the Times of Israel wording, firing rockets and launching drones at northern Israel, causing heavy damage to an army base in one of the attacks. Hezbollah has fired 1,000 rockets, mortars, missiles, and drones at Israel since October 8th, the day after the Gaza war erupted, according to Yoav Galan. And it looks like here the pictures are quite devastating looking. It seems to be, not really many standing structures left in this base. Important to say that this is something that, if you're Israel, you need to cause this much, chaos and consternation in the region by committing, war crime after war crime in, perfect view of the entire Arab world and the world in general. You are going to probably have to expect some sort of backlash and some sort of trouble at your own borders. And I think it's clear and should be important to say that under any sort of, normal circumstances of how countries interact with each other, this is not, any sort of, war crime. This doesn't go against international law. This is a entity that is hitting a military target with no civilians under threat. So I think it's important to highlight that there. No injuries were caused in the attacks, but heavy damage and a fire were caused at the Biranit base, according to footage. In response to the attacks, IDF said fighter jets, combat helicopters, and tanks struck Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon. In a separate incident, the IDF said it struck a Hezbollah cell planning to carry out an anti-tank missile attack from the Lebanese village of Marwahin. Later, some 25 rockets and 3 suicide drones launched by Hezbollah from Lebanon at multiple locations along the border. So it seems to be probably that fact that base was attacked, probably the most damage caused by a Hezbollah attack yet. But Hassan Nasrallah's shall we say, controversial militant group up north is still going to be clearly on Israel's mind for the near future and how this war plays out. All right, now we're going to our last story today, a really disturbing story, shall we say, out of Argentina, where an absolutely crazy, as in hearing voices in his head, like crazy, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist has just won the election there. Here's a little bit of preview. Now we know that Javier Milei has won. But here's a little bit of an analysis from an Argentinian voice in Jacobin.com. Like, this guy is someone who's said that, Margaret Thatcher, of all people, was his idol. This is, of course, the woman who invaded Argentina back in the 80s. And he's still pretty, I think it was a 10-point victory, beat the leftist guy, showing just how dead the left wing is in Argentina at the moment. Probably going to lead to some big time, soul searching after this for sure. Especially this guy is someone who's known for just one of his most viral campaign media pieces was him looking at just this magnets on a whiteboard of most federal agencies and saying, we're getting rid of this one, we're getting rid of that one, we're taking this one away, we're privatizing this, privatizing that. So again, a lot of people probably in Washington and Wall Street very, very happy with his win today. So again, Massa's win in the general election may have tempered some of the more pessimistic forecasts of a far-right takeover in Argentina, but of course he didn't win, so we know that now. However, the fact remains that there is a free market, paleo-libertarian, still a narrow favorite in most polling. There needs to be, in other words, a more honest reflection on the rise of the far right in the long run, as inoculated against just this kind of reactionary turn. Historically, the Argentine far right had been excluded from the halls of power until months ago. Milei's Avanza Libertad, or Freedom Advances, it was essentially a non-existent political force. Thus, the Argentinian political class underestimated the tectonic shift taking place in society and failed to track their political repercussions. Understanding the eruption of a vigorous far right amid Argentina's social democratic consensus requires going below the surface. Upon deeper inspection, Milei's ascent is clearly related to what is truly the bellwether event of this political juncture, the once-in-a-lifetime crisis of Peronism, big tent populist formation around which the Argentinian political system has been orbiting since 1945. Some will argue that Peronism was resuscitated with Massa's victory. Others will claim that only a candidate as bizarre as Milei, whose mental health has come into question over recent weeks, could give the wildly unpopular Minister of the Economy a fighting chance, thus undercutting the idea of a far-right threat. The truth, however, is that both phenomena, Peronist collapse and the rise of the far right, as oftentimes we see the collapse of a failing kind of liberal order, can very quickly lead to the rise of far right. They are both real and interrelated. And we are not going to get through all this article. It's a very good article there on Jacobin.com, but I do want to get into this really earthquake in Peronism, and how it led to the situation that we are in today. So the Peronists, they're unlike any other political party. Peronism's presence in all spheres and levels of social life its proximity to state structures, its on-the-ground influence through party militants and patronage networks, and its close links with the labor and social movements make it a political force whose resiliency invites few modern-day comparisons. Just people who, ever since World War II have been in complete control and complete power of the country, or not complete control, but, they have built the country around that consensus, around that ideological framework. Between 1946 and 1883, Peronism never lost a competitive election. It was, however, banned for decades. In presidential elections, its electoral floor always hovered around 40% of the vote. Peronism's worst result was 2015, when it reached 38%, and that was because a competing Peronist candidate won 14%. By contrast, on August 13th, Peronism went to the polls completely unified and saw its vote share reduced to 27%. Now, for the first time, Peronism is on the verge of losing its majority in the Senate and ceding control of the governorships in provinces historically considered Peronist strongholds. Santa Cruz, San Juan, and Chaco are notable examples. Since the restoration of democratic rule, Argentina has been rocked by major capitalist crises. In 1989, 2001, and 2019, each time Peronism emerged as the party of order, the one force capable of providing the social ballast to keep the state from collapsing and restore governability. In that same sense, the current crisis of Peronism is very much a crisis of the Argentine state itself. However, the tremors of the current political earthquake have been felt beyond the Peronist camp. Amid massive discontent with the incumbent Peronist government, the traditional right wing had apparently recently considered itself the apparent heir to the Casa Rosada. Now, with the appearance of Milei, the conservative coalition of Juntos el Cambio is staring down the possibility of its own collapse, and kind of a very much, the traditional right-wing party, similar to the way it was in France, was completely invalidated by the rise of, in that case, Macron, but this time someone to the right of Macron, similar to almost like a Le Pen-style figure, but much more economically right-wing than socially right-wing, as Le Pen is. But the tremors of the current political earthquake have been, again, felt beyond this camp. Patricia Bullrich emerged as the winner of the kind of center-right primary. Were not for the appearance of Milei, it would have been Bullrich, the most openly reactionary Juntos candidate, who would have attracted all the attention. For the first time since Argentina's democratic restoration, a mainstream party was putting forward an openly ultra-right-wing candidate to compete for the general election. Nevertheless, Juntos por el Cambio had experienced an electoral setback even worse than 2019, when the former president, Juntos leader Mauricio Macri, was roundly denied a second term. The traditional Argentine right wing, once confident of returning to power, is now closer to extinction after losing the general to Milei by a substantial margin. And of course, you don't have to look much further than the economy to see why people are pretty pissed off. We have a continuing stagnating economy and inflation hovering around a cool 140%. The rise of the extreme right raises the possibility of the kind of neoliberal shock therapy that the social opposition has kept at bay. And I think that is, one kind of encouraging note to end on. As we've seen it in many other Latin American countries, one of the biggest forces of bulwarks against reactionary change has been strong, social ties around progressive politics and values. If they're truly coming under threat, I feel like this will be the one best chance Argentina has at resisting some of crazy man Milei's, most dark and twisted fantasies, essentially. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy your holiday season. We'll be back on Wednesday. It's Newsflash.